got a hypothetical question for you. If somebody said they were going to drop you in any Midwestern state and your job was to go in and hunt a whitetail successfully, what rifle would you bring? You don't know what environment you're going into, you don't know what shot opportunities are going to come your way, you don't know anything specifically about your hunt, you just know that you need a rifle. That question inspired the build we're going to talk about today, which is my Ruger American Predator, or at least it used to be. It's still a Ruger American Predator barreled action, but I've taken the liberty to modify quite a few components on this rifle, as you can see. And in today's video, we're going to go from muzzle to buttstock and talk about every modification I've made to this rifle and why, in order to make it my most versatile and adaptable rifle in my entire collection. Stay tuned, let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back to Outdoor Tactics. My name is Robert. Today, like I said, we're going to be taking a look at my Ruger American Predator Gen 1 in .308 Winchester. Now, I've had this rifle for quite a few years now, picked it up in a local gun shop kind of on a whim, and it was inspired by an old hunting rifle that I used to use when I was quite a bit younger. It was a Remington 788, I believe, short barrel, beautiful blonde colored stock on it, and a Bushnell 3-9 Dawn to Dusk classic deer rifle, fed from a little single feed metal magazine that I thought was just the coolest thing back in the day. And I loved that rifle. I took the longest shot I've ever taken on a whitetail with that rifle at 250 yards and folded up a doe out in West Virginia. And I've got really cool memories with, sort of short-ish barreled 308s. So we already talked about why I built this rifle in general. It's meant to be versatile, short, handy, not too light, not too heavy, not too much recoil, very easy to shoot, and a very fun gun to carry in the woods with you. And it could play ball with pretty much any medium-sized game here in North America, whitetail, pronghorn, mule deer, wild hogs, whatever have you. I think if I were to take this on an elk hunt, I would feel a little bit limited with a short-barreled 308, but inside 300 yards, I would definitely feel perfectly confident with it. We're also running some pretty spicy hand loads, which we will talk about a little bit later in the video, but they just add to this thing's effectiveness in the situations that I find myself hunting in. So the most obvious change that you can see made to this rifle is that beautiful Boyd's hardwood stock. Now, I've got no relationship with Boyd's, but they do some fantastic work with hardwood gun stocks. If you need something in a laminated wood and you want to be able to customize it to the color, shape, finish that you like, they are definitely an awesome resource for you to use in that case. This is specifically their Spike Camp stock. It's a fairly short length of pull, right? It's meant to be compact and quick to wield. Also, the forend is also quite short and cuts off here at this sort of angled taper. And it's got a nice flat bottom forend as well, so you can lay it either on your pack or sandbags or an improvised shooting position from a limb or what have you. And it's also got this lovely thumb hole cutout, which I actually really enjoy the ergonomics of. I feel that it kind of gets into the realm of pistol grip, which is really fast, easy to point. And this rifle points very naturally, almost as if it were almost like a skeet shooting shotgun. It also comes with a really nice recoil pad right back here, standard fare as far as sling swivels go, front and rear. And I just love the look and feel of this thing. It's not the lightest stock in the world. We're not trying to shave every ounce possible off of this rifle, and we'll talk about why a little bit later in the video. But it is absolutely a gorgeous stock coming in from Boyd's, and one that I've enjoyed owning quite a lot. Those of you that are familiar with the Gen 1 Ruger Americans will remember that there was quite a bit of flex in the stock up at the forend, and that could lead to some issues in your barrel harmonics and your point of impact shifting when you're on a bipod, or if you're on some sort of, again, improvised shooting position that you might find in the woods, where you're leaning that stock up against something and camming too much weight into that receiver, or into the barrel, pardon me, and you're going to get some impact shift and some issues with barrel harmonics. Switching to laminated hardwood, obviously it's going to stiffen up that stock and diminish the issues of that stock being flimsy enough to touch your barrel under different shooting positions. So that was really the issue with the rifle that made me want to switch stocks to begin with. And to say it's an issue is a bit of a stretch. It's more or less something you need to be aware of if you are leaving your Generation 1 Ruger American bone stock. Another very mild point of contention that I had with the stock Ruger American were its magazines. Now, don't get me wrong, the Ruger American feeds fairly well in all of my experiences. I don't think I've ever actually sat down and had a notable issue with feeding from a Ruger American, Ranch Predator, standard model, whatever it happens to be. in all of my experience. But I do prefer, if I'm going to use a magazine at all, I prefer AICS pattern magazines. Now, these are a mil-spec sort of design and something that's very robust and very well known in the market, and a lot of people make very high quality bottom metal to allow your rifle to take these magazines. Typically for hunting scenarios where I'm planning on taking 1 or 2 maximum shots, a 5-round box mag is doing just fine. But Boyd actually sells the bottom metal components for their stocks, and you can just go onto their website and order a bottom metal AICS compatible adapter for the stock that you've ordered and get it attached to your rifle with just a couple of screws. Now, one thing you may notice that makes this rifle look quite different than your standard Ruger American is the bolt. Let me get this guy popped out of here real quick. This bolt does not look like a standard Ruger American bolt. Let me grab another one for comparison for you, but if you are familiar with the Ruger Americans, you know that they don't come with black Cerakoted bolts, especially not fluted ones, at least in the Generation 1 models. A standard Generation 1 Ruger American has this silver stainless finished bolt, so you can kind of see the difference here, right? In the fluted version that I've upgraded to, and the standard flat stainless here on your right, my left. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with these bolts. They run flawlessly. I haven't had them weather poorly. I haven't had them rust. Although if you're dealing with like saltwater environments or something, I could see how these might be an issue for you. But as long as you keep it well oiled, these bolts are going to be just fine. This is actually the stock bolt from my Gen 1 Ruger American. It was sent off to a company called AD Arms Custom Rifles. And I have no relationship with the guy. I don't know him. We don't work together. We've never talked. But I am going to give him a huge shout out because he does some awesome work on bolt fluting and micro slick Cerakoting. Now, this bolt fluting is mostly cosmetic, I will be honest with you guys. It does shave a little bit of weight, but very, very little weight when you flute something as small as your bolt with this shallow of a cut. But the micro slick Cerakote does something very nice. It makes it very, very weatherproof and takes that squeakiness out of your Ruger American, which is something they were kind of known for. Fluting does serve a purpose other than looking sweet as hell. It's also able to sort of give dirt, grime, and ice a place to go. If you could imagine closing the bolt with some sort of debris on the outside, it would most likely just carry its way into your action, and that can be a problem for reliability and feeding and just running your rifle in general. So that fluting gives that dirt, grime, ice, whatever it happens to be, even water, just a place to flow out into where it can sit inside of these grooves and not impede the action of your rifle. Now, even with that being said and the functional nature of fluting and micro slick Cerakoting out of the way, you could look me in the eye and tell me that is purely cosmetic and you don't need it, and my honest response to you would be yes. Okay, let's talk about the barrel. The heart of the rifle and the heart of the rifle's inherent accuracy is the barrel. The Ruger American Predators come with a not so light barrel contour, which I'm actually quite a big fan of. For something like a 308 where I can actually afford to push a fairly high volume of fire through it at a decently fast rate, this barrel is pretty good at mitigating heat mirage coming off the top of it, as opposed to a thinner barrel that's going to heat up faster and start to string shots sooner. Now, of course, you are going to end up having more weight to carry around with you when you go with a thicker contour barrel like this, but more weight also means less recoil and easier to shoot, more shootability, I guess I could say. And it's definitely a trade-off. I have very thin contoured rifles in my collection as well, and when I am on a hunt that calls for minimal weight and I'm not so much worried about a high volume of fire, those rifles come out and this one stays at home. But for most situations, the added weight from this barrel being a little bit thicker is not going to make or break my hunt, and I just sort of deal with it, and I take it for what it is worth, which is accuracy. This barrel out of the box is very, very accurate. I get sub MOA groups with cheap off-the-shelf, factory ammo, Remington core locked tipped, Hornady whitetail, standard interlock soft point stuff. Not super fancy ammo, still prints under an inch. And then with my hand loads, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I'm anywhere from 0.6 on a really good group to 0.8 on a group, sort of in that average. So easily a sub-minute gun approaching half-minute accuracy. And for the standard shots that I'm going to be taking on game in the woods, that's actually probably overkill for how much accuracy this rifle needs, but I am definitely never going to complain about that. Also to note, this rifle is a shorter barreled 308 bolt gun. This is an 18-inch barrel, not legally a short-barreled rifle, not even close. But by chopping this down from the standard 24-inch to 18 inches, you are losing 6 inches worth of muzzle velocity. The good news is, on a rifle like this, being chambered in 308, losing barrel length doesn't really affect 308 as much as some other barrel length dependent cartridges. That's one of the upsides of using a 308. So out of this barrel, I'm able to push 130 grain projectiles at 3,000 feet per second, which are those hand loads I've been kind of alluding to through this video, which we'll talk about at the end. But I'm still able to get very competitive and very, very effective velocity out of a short barrel like this while gaining the maneuverability and allowing me to more easily wield a gun with a suppressor. Now, since I just mentioned the suppressor on this rifle, we'll get straight into that. This is a Yankee Hill Machining Resonator K, and this rifle pretty much runs exclusively suppressed now because it is short enough, light enough, and packable enough to allow for a suppressor without too much headache as far as maneuverability and packability goes. The YHM Resonator is a fantastic can for the money. They run fairly cheap, and they are very effective for their weight. These cans only weigh about 9 ounces, and you can change out the weights to make them even lighter by going with different muzzle devices and different attachment methods. Speaking of attachment methods, I am using the SRX system, which is just a simple friction fit. You thread the can over an existing QD muzzle device, and then you can run it unsuppressed and just have the muzzle brake for recoil reduction, or you can run it suppressed, which will also mitigate recoil, but obviously you got to deal with that added length. Suppressor does a good job of mitigating flash signature and also sound signature. Now, since we are running supersonic ammunition, it does not make this rifle hearing safe, so I still run Ear Pro at the range. But in the woods, where I'm most likely not going to be running Ear Pro, it takes the bite off of that report of that rifle going off quite a lot. The last ear I took with it was with it suppressed, and there was virtually no ringing in my ears after that shot. It was very comfortable to shoot, and my dad was actually in the blind with me, and he noted that that was a very comfortable shot to hear go off. On the opposite end of the spectrum, as far as audible comfort, we have this thing on the end of my 350 Legend Ruger American, and that thing is barky. Everybody knows when that rifle goes off, versus this one, it's much more comfortable to the ear. Now, the longer that I shoot and the longer that I hunt and shoot steel at long range, the more interested I become in the quality of a trigger. The Ruger American trigger is good, and that's about it, right? The Ruger American trigger is perfectly serviceable. It's adjustable from about 5 to 3 pounds. I typically turn mine down to 3 pounds and leave them there, and it is 2-stage. I'm going to go ahead and clear this rifle real quick. The trigger shoe on here is sort of a copy, sort of not a copy of an Accu trigger, I believe, from Savage. And it has this little shoe on the front that is your safety. This trigger cannot be depressed without that middle shoe being depressed as well, which is going to make, negligently discharging your rifle more difficult, which is always a good thing, right? The trigger itself is very nice. If I bring this up and sort of run that trigger real quick, there's a little bit of take up right there, and then a hard wall, and it stops and breaks. Honestly, it's not a limiting trigger, right? I don't feel like, man, if I had a much nicer trigger, I would be way more accurate with this rifle. It's one of those things you just kind of train into. I've got single stage triggers like on my Christensen Arms Mesa, which I have a full review of on the channel already. People tend to like that video, it seems, so I will leave that linked up in the cards right now. But that is a single stage Timney trigger, and I could always drop one of those into this rifle if I ever felt like doing so. But for right now, the Ruger American Gen 1 trigger turned down to about 3 pounds. It's just a perfectly serviceable trigger, and I wouldn't really want to change it. And finally, one of the most important modifications you can make to a rifle is the optic and optic mount choice that you go with. As you can see here, I've gone with Tally ultralight rings, 1-inch rings on a Vortex Crossfire 3-9x40. Tally rings you're going to see across a lot of my rifles. If you do stick around the channel, feel free to subscribe so that you get notified when I drop more videos. But Tally rings are simple, durable, and bolt directly to your receiver so that you don't have a pick rail bolted to a receiver and then scope rings bolted to your pick rail and then a scope bolted inside of your rings. It's just less variables and less tolerant stacking and less chance for stuff to fail. So I really like direct thread-on rings, unless I need like a 20 MOA cant, which this rifle doesn't. And Tallies do a wonderful job at that for me. And then the Vortex Crossfire 2 3-9 is a budget-oriented scope. It's a sub $200 scope all day, and it has their BDC reticle, which is built with different hash marks so that you can sort of build out a dope sheet for your reticle and just hold over with those hash marks instead of having to dial. But if you want to dial, you can just unscrew these scope caps and you have a dial-up turret right on top. If it'll focus, there it goes. And that makes it very easy to just dial to different ranges. I've actually taken this scope out to 500, 600, 700 yards on steel and made first round impacts at 500 yards, and then had to work with some pretty crazy wind that day to make consistent impacts at 6 and 7. I do not feel limited by the quality of glass, the quality of zoom range, or the durability of the Crossfire 2 as of right now, and I've been running these scopes on multiple rifles for quite a few years. Okay, final thing I want to talk to you guys about here is ammunition. Now, your ammunition choice is very, very, very important on a hunting rifle for some pretty obvious reasons. The only thing about this rifle that's actually doing any damage to ethically harvest those animals that you're hunting is the bullet. It's not even the whole cartridge, it's just the bullet. And then that cartridge just drives that bullet at whatever target speed you have. This is a 130 grain Barnes TTSX all copper monometal bullet. Now, the reason I went with a light for caliber monometal copper bullet is because this shorter barrel loses me velocity. The only way to increase that velocity without changing the cartridge altogether is to go with a light for caliber bullet to increase that speed. Now, if you go for a light for caliber lead projectile, unless it's bonded or has some sort of structural component to hold it together, typically you're going to get less penetration. We want high penetration because we are trying to get 2 holes through that animal every single time that we take a shot, be it with a bow or a rifle. The only way to offset this loss in penetration is to change construction, and the monometal Barnes TTSX does exactly that. These things have been extremely effective on every deer I've shot them through, and I do mean through when I say through. They do not stop. They have petals that mushroom out, and then the main shank holds onto those petals, and it drives all the way through that animal, which leads to a fast, ethical harvest. But I'm able to push these TTSXs at 3,000 feet per second out of this 18-inch barrel and a fairly spicy hand load. We are not over the max load in our reloading manual, but we're just about right at that max load, just because that's where our accuracy node fell during our testing. And I'm definitely not going to argue with more speed if I can get it. Alright guys, that's about going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully this was a little bit insightful for you. Hopefully this showed off what modifications can be made to a rifle to make it perfected to your needs. If you have any questions about the modifications I've made or suggestions on where to take this rifle in the future, because again, this is sort of a test bed rifle where I can throw whatever accessory I want on it and try it out for myself, please let me know down in the comments. If you found this video helpful, entertaining, or useful in any way, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me out a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.